Hi, I'm Tiffany, and this is Towering TBR. Today I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite nonfiction titles. I'm actually going to start with an honorable mention because I had such a hard time narrowing it down to 10. But I'd like to recommend In Cold Blood by Truman Capote as my honorable mention. This was written in 1996 and is considered the first true crime story ever written. It follows the murder of the Clutter family, a mom, dad, a boy, and a girl. And Capote, he painstakingly looks up all the details. He interviews the killers to try and get their motivations and understand what prompted them to commit these acts, and creates a well put together structure of what happened. This is a classic, so I'm sure most of you have heard of it, but if you haven't read it, I would say it really holds up and I would recommend it. I want to recommend Behind the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo. Catherine Boo is a journalist who spent several years in India, and she follows families living in a slum near the Mumbai airport. She really draws quite a stark contrast between the Mumbai airport and the hotels that are meant there for wealthy visitors, and the tenements, the lean-tos, the basically homeless encampment that is right there near the airport as well. She writes incredibly vividly. I felt like I was transported there. She talks about the smells too, and that was vivid to me as well. But yeah, this is a great book and I would recommend it. Something you will see is almost all of these are quite bleak, but I think that that's why they've stayed with me. They're about people in really unfortunate situations and how people can flourish and even thrive. So you may see that as a theme through all these books. One that I don't think is sad is Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. Jenny Lawson is incredible. She has mental health and physical health issues that she writes about in such a quirky and fun way. Some of the situations she gets in, like, they baffle me, but wow, she's funny. And the title comes from the fact that when she experiences her depression, she feels very low, but she feels she has the capability on the other end of the extreme to have extreme joy. And yeah, there's a lot of really funny situations that she writes about in here. The next couple, I don't have the physical copies, so I'll insert it in. But I want to recommend Evicted by Matthew Desmond. This won the Pulitzer Prize in 2017 for nonfiction, and it's amazing. He, similarly to Catherine Boo, is a journalist who follows families throughout several years, talking about what it's like to be evicted and have housing insecurity and how difficult it is to secure housing once you've been evicted. It's a permanent black mark on your record, and it often leads people with no choice but to, find housing with slumlords who don't have safe housing options. Well, some of the people are in these situations because of their poor choices. A lot of people just get really unlucky. They get disabled or they get really behind, and I guess fortunately I've never experienced homelessness, but I didn't realize how traumatic it is for those individuals, and how in previous years communities would come forward and take care of people, and how we don't have those safety nets quite so much anymore. It's incredibly interesting and really well researched, and eventually it'll be out of date, but I still feel like it's really valuable today. I'd also like to recommend No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder. This is a hard book to read, I will admit. The tagline, "No visible bruises, what you don't know about domestic violence could kill you." She talks about how mass shooters and family annihilators are often convicted of domestic violence first, and how domestic violence in almost all cases will escalate if it's not nipped in the bud. And she talks about different programs meant to rehabilitate these men, and different social services that are trying to predict who might become a victim in need. She even interviews men who have killed their partners, and sometimes their children or other people as well. And I mean, bravo to her. Unfortunately, I don't think the rehabilitation program has been highly successful, and yeah, I'm not sure what we're gonna do about it. Next book I want to talk about is 10 Steps to Nanette by Hannah Gadsby. Hannah Gadsby is a queer, autistic, Australian comedian, and that's her memoir. She writes about getting diagnosed with autism as an adult, and how that explains a lot of her social awkwardness. She also talks about her mental health and the struggles that she has faced. She also talks about growing up as a lesbian in Tasmania when it was illegal, and the kinds of damage that the homophobic community did to her and other LGBT plus people. However, I will say that even with these hard subjects, she has a real knack at turning something awful into a really dark humor. And I would definitely recommend the audiobook because she narrates it herself, and I'm a sucker for an accent, so it sounds pretty good. The next book I want to talk about is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. This is a look into a family, the Galvin family, who had 12 children, and 6 of them were diagnosed with schizophrenia. And so they became one of the first families to donate DNA material for people to look for genetic markers of schizophrenia. They talk about the nature versus nurture, and how some of the kids growing up in the same environment with the same genetics don't get schizophrenia, and some do. As a psych major, I was really interested in this subject, and they've apparently done a lot for schizophrenia genetic research. I also want to recommend When Broken Glass Floats by Chenrithi Him. This is about her memoir growing up in under the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. She and her family are taken to labor camps, and there's so much horror she faces. She sees people murdered in front of her. People die from starvation or malnutrition or diseases that could have been prevented in a normal society, but they don't have medical assistance in the camps. And ultimately, she is sponsored by a relative, so she immigrates to the United States. But she talks about the real trauma of growing up in these camps. And this was the first time I'd really read anything about the Khmer Rouge, and I don't know why. Like, we hear lots about the Holocaust and other genocides, but I didn't really know much about the Khmer Rouge or their labor camps, and this informed me quite a bit. I have heard that there's a graphic novel version of this book as well. I just have the regular novel. So I don't know how good or bad that is, but if you're thinking you'd like to pick it up, there's at least 2 options. I do want to read a poem that she writes in the very beginning that was heartbreaking. It's called Please Give Us a Voice. When broken glass floats, a nation drowns, descending to the abyss. From the mass graves in the once gentle land, their blood seeps into Mother Earth. Their suffering spirits whisper to her, why has this happened? Their voice resounds in the spirit world, shouts through the souls of the survivors, determined to connect, begging the world, please remember us. Please speak for us. Please bring us justice. Wow, it's heartbreaking and inspiring and a very good read. I also would like to recommend Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. He was born in Depression era New York City, and his family, facing hard times, decides to move back to Ireland. And this is his memoir talking about growing up in Ireland as a very poor family. His father is an alcoholic, and he has a lot of siblings, some who do not make it. He had a hard upbringing, but he delivers his childhood story with some wry humor. He talks about how as a child he was convinced that his siblings were brought by an angel on the 7th step rather than, actually how babies come to be. And he is a great writer. There are actually 2 more memoirs that he's written, but this is the one that focuses on his childhood, and this is my favorite. I think I saved the best book for last, and that is All the Young Men by Ruth Coker Burks. She is amazing, and I had never heard of her before. So it starts out in the 1980s when she goes to the hospital to visit a friend. And in doing so, she sees the nurses and doctors acting really strange about not wanting to go into a patient's room. And when she decides to go in, she sees that the man is dying from AIDS and he's not going to make it through the night. And she sits there and holds his hand and comforts him as he dies. And this one event triggers activism that lasts for 20 years. She becomes their ally, their advocate. The parents of the HIV positive men don't want to bury their children. They want to ignore how they died. And so she cremates them and buries them with her own money. And she creates networks of support for these people and helps them apply for Medicaid and brings them food when they're not feeling well, brings them medication. And yeah, she's just this incredible, amazing activist. And I just wish there were more people like her. She was incredible, and this is her story. I think what makes it even more incredible is that she was a single mother, and she was desperately afraid her ex was going to find out about her activism and use it as a way to take custody of their child. So she has to keep it hidden for a while. But yeah, she's amazing, and this story was amazing. And if you want to know anything about AIDS or HIV in the 80s and 90s, especially in the South, I urge you to pick it up. So those were the 10 nonfiction titles I'd recommend, plus an honorable mention of In Cold Blood. Tell me, is there any nonfiction titles that you particularly love and want to recommend to me? Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.